bountiful harvest we made this month, a tour of the California garden, some things for you to do, all this and a lot more in today's episode of California Gardening. So let's begin with all the harvests we made this month. Beginning with the hummingbird tree leaf harvest. We had our hummingbird tree growing in a container, and these leaves are extremely nutritious. They are not only nutritious, they're also very delicious. And this is a tropical plant. The hummingbird tree will not tolerate a freeze or a severe winter. However, I grew this plant as an annual and it's perfectly fine. This plant gives us lots of leaves, very delicious leaves, and is also a very vigorous grower. So all in all, I was very happy with the way the hummingbird tree grew for us this season, and we were able to harvest a lot of leaves every few days. And here are the leaves. As you can see, they look beautiful. And this is our harvest. Very nice leaves, very healthy, very delicious. Moving on to our banana bud harvest. The banana bud can be harvested once the fruits form on the top. And you can see here we are cutting off the bottom portion of where the fruits are a little tiny. And this is what gives us the banana bud that you see here. And the fruits will continue to develop while we enjoy the banana bud or the banana flower, which looks like this. And you can use these beautiful banana flowers in a lot of ways. We have shared some recipes in the past. Here you can see the banana bud cooked with lentils and coconut and spices, and it's really delicious. Sweet corn. Our sweet corn plants were growing on the raised bed, and we did plant a lot of sweet corn plants all together, very close to each other. And you can look at the cobs here, they're ready for harvest now. And once the corn silks on the top start drying just a little bit, is when you can start harvesting your corn cobs. You can wait a little longer for the cobs to mature more, but as you can see here, let's peel off this corn cob and show you. The kernels are formed and they look very nice and are ready to be consumed. So we will go ahead and harvest all our corn cobs. And corn is one plant that you can really crowd together. You can grow a lot of plants in a very small space and they will grow perfectly fine. In fact, it's better to grow multiple corn plants in the same location because you will get a lot of corn due to them getting pollinated very easily due to multiple plants present. And as we are harvesting these corn cobs, these plants are done. So we're removing these stems and throwing them away. You can put it in your compost bin as well if you shred it properly, or you can put it in your green waste. But we are removing all the plants here. They have yielded a lot of cobs in just a small space. And I was very happy with the harvest, as you can see here. Beautiful looking corn cobs. Moving on to our sour cucumber, also called dosakkai. We were growing a lot of these cucumbers on our raised beds. And this is a very prolific grower. You can get a lot of cucumbers from this plant in just a small space with just a few plants. And you can see the fruit is ready for harvest when it turns slightly brown in color, dark yellow to a brown color. And then you can start harvesting all of these fruits once they ripen. Now the interesting part about this cucumber is that this cucumber is cooked before eating. And it has a slightly sour taste, which is why it's called the sour cucumber. And it's a very popular vegetable that's used in a lot of dishes in southern India, in southern Indian cuisines. And it's also very delicious. So for example, there is a dish called sambar, which you can Google and get the recipe. And this sour cucumber is used to make that dish, which tastes really good. And you can see we have a lot of cucumbers growing, so we'll harvest a few here. And leave the ones that are green to ripen so we can harvest them later. But you can look at a harvest here, beautiful looking cucumbers. This was very easy to grow and very delicious as well. Eggplants. We were growing multiple varieties of eggplants. This is the black moon eggplant that was overwintered from last year. And the plant grew very well in a pot. And this is how they look like. We also had eggplants growing on our raised bed. And this is the Indian purple eggplant, the medium-sized eggplant. They look beautiful. It has a bright purple color, very nice taste as well. And you can look at our first harvest here in August. Beautiful looking eggplants. And there were several more eggplants growing on our raised bed. We had both the Indian purple eggplant as well as the small Indian eggplants. Now the small Indian eggplants are also very unique. You can harvest them when they are smaller. And we also had these very large Aswad eggplants that were growing on the raised bed. Now these are extremely large eggplants and you can cook a lot of dishes using this eggplant. Very unique variety that we tried for the first time this year, and I was quite happy with the large eggplants this plant produces. Beautiful looking eggplants as you can see here. Very dark purple in color. And on our raised beds, once again, we had a lot of these small Indian eggplants. This is an heirloom variety. I've been saving seeds for these for many years. And this is a very prolific variety as well. Now the reason we are harvesting these eggplants when they are really small like this is to cook it by stuffing, where you just add some spices like turmeric and salt and chili powder, and you can then shallow cook it to prepare very interesting dishes. The other way I like to cook eggplants is by adding some groundnut powder. Just crush some peanuts or groundnuts, add some spices, stuff it in, and you can cook some really good eggplants from these. You can look at our harvest here, beautiful looking eggplants. Moving on to figs. We have our mission fig that's growing in a container. We actually repotted this to the larger container that you see so that it grows even bigger. But the mission figs are one of the tastiest figs. They have a really nice dark color, very sweet flesh, and they're one of the best figs you can grow in Southern California. Now we also had our Little Miss Figgy plant. This is a different fig variety that can easily be grown in containers. And the Little Miss Figgy plant is quite a drought tolerant plant. So you can grow this in a container. You don't have to worry about watering it too much. But I just love the taste of mission figs. So that's a variety that I would highly recommend that you all grow in your home garden. Hyacinth beans. Our hyacinth bean plant was growing in the ground, and we had a really large plant that produced a lot of hyacinth beans. Now the hyacinth beans is one bean that you have to cook before you eat. You cannot eat them raw. And this plant produces abundantly. You have been seeing me harvesting these beans month over month, and from spring through summer and even late summer, you can get beautiful harvests like these. So all in all, we had a great season of hyacinth beans. Moving on to ivy gourd. We had ivy gourd plants growing everywhere. This is the one growing in the container, and this is the one on the raised bed. The one on the raised beds has a lot of space, much more than the container. So you can see a lot of ivy gourds on this plant. And this is the smaller variety of ivy gourd. This plant produces abundantly, but the ivy gourds are a little small. All in all, this is a great variety to grow as well, just because of the sheer number of gourds it produces. Especially summer and late summer are the peak months for ivy gourd production. And in places like Southern California, where you have hot and dry summers, ivy gourds thrive in such weather. Coming back to our container, we had more ivy gourds growing there. And this is the ivy gourd that's longer in shape. This is the other variety of ivy gourd that we are growing. And a lot of people like this variety compared to the smaller ones. We had the same variety growing in the ground as well. You can look at the ivy gourds, they are longer. And the one growing in the ground also has produced a lot of ivy gourds. And ivy gourds will continue to grow vigorously through the summer season. You can look at our harvest here, beautiful looking ivy gourds. Now the one that grows on the ground is definitely a little more prolific. It will keep producing ivy gourds for a long time. So we ended up harvesting ivy gourds from the one in the ground many times. And you can look at the plant as well here. It's larger in size. I also added this really huge trellis so that it could climb on this trellis. And these are extremely flavorful ivy gourds, the long variety again for the one growing in the ground. And we were able to harvest a lot of ivy gourds from this plant. Now ivy gourds don't need a lot of fertilizer or nutrients. I do add worm tea every 15 days on most of my vegetable plants. The ground is also amended with worm castings for added nutrients. And you can buy all these from Vermistera. That's the company I buy my worm castings and my worm tea from. They are excellent quality products and something that I highly recommend everyone using in their home garden. Moringa. You can look at our moringa tree. It's a huge tree now. And there were a lot of pods, moringa pods that you see here. And I made this little moringa plucker, if you want to call it, by using a PVC pipe and then attaching a garden pin at the end. And this makes it very easy to harvest these pods that are very high up. Now it's recommended that you trim your tree every year, but our tree has grown extremely large, as you can see here. But beautiful looking moringa pods, as you can see, from this really big tree. You can chop it up and it looks like this. And you can even harvest the moringa leaves that you see here. And these make some really great dishes. You can make moringa powder out of these leaves. And it also makes some great dishes that we have shared earlier. These are moringa leaves with lentils and tomatoes and onions with spices. And it's extremely delicious. Okra. We had many okra plants growing in the garden. And this one is the Nombo giant okra that's growing in a container. The Nombo giant okra is my preferred okra variety just because of the sheer amount of large pods it produces. It's also an heirloom variety. It will keep producing and you can save the seeds for the upcoming season. And you can look at all these beautiful looking pods here. The Nombo giant is also a very vigorous growing plant. And we kept coming back for more and more harvests from this plant during the month of August. And here's one more round of harvest for the Nombo giant okra growing in the container. And you can grow up to 4 plants in one container. 3 to 4 plants are ideal since these are larger okra plants. But the number of okras this plant produces is quite stunning. You can even harvest the okras when they are a little tender. In fact, I highly recommend that you harvest the okras when they are a little tender because they grow very fast. And within one day, you can see the okra go from a very small okra to a large okra. All in all, the Nombo giant okra is one of my favorite okra varieties to grow, especially in containers. These are one of the earliest okras that we started, and they produced a lot of okras, as you can see here. And okras do well with a tomato vegetable fertilizer. Moving on to our raised beds, we had our emerald okra. Now the emerald okra is also very delicious. It's a little more thick than the Nombo giant okra. So a lot of people prefer the longer and slender okra. However, you can't go wrong with the emerald okra as well. This is also a very prolific variety that produces a lot of pods that you see here. And they're excellent in taste. The emerald okra is probably one of the best tasting okras. And you can look at the harvest of this emerald okra here. And this particular patch on the raised bed has a lot of compost. We added a lot of homemade compost to this raised bed. And you can see the results. These okras are extremely large. The plants are growing very strong. And there are just a whole lot of okras on these plants. Once again, try to harvest the okras when they are tender. You will get much better harvests if you harvest the okras when they are tender. We also had the burgundy okra or the red okra growing in the raised bed. And you can see this okra is a little more fibrous than the emerald okra or the Nombo giant okra. It's also a very prolific producer, but taste-wise it's not my favorite, although the colors, the anthocyanins in the plant or the fruit are very good for you. So the more colorful vegetables you eat, the better it is for your health. And this particular variety, the red burgundy okra, is a very prolific variety, as I mentioned, and we were coming back week after week for more and more harvests. And they are heavy feeders, so make sure that you feed your okra plants with some organic fertilizers, and you can get some really good harvest like you see here. Beautiful looking okras. And more harvests here. And the month of August was really productive for growing okra. Betel leaf. Now this is a very unique plant. It's possible that a lot of you don't know about this plant, but it's a very tropical plant that we are growing in our greenhouse, and it yields these leaves. These leaves are extremely spicy, extremely delicious. It's eaten as a dessert after meals. It's very popular in South Asia. You can look at the betel leaves here. Beautiful looking betel leaves. It's a very tropical plant, extremely difficult to grow. However, I love the taste of these betel leaves. And you can see we are harvesting the leaves from areas where the plant has sent out new shoots. And this is how the leaves look like. Beautiful looking leaves, very healthy and very delicious. And we have plenty more leaves on the plant. Papaya. A very delicious tropical fruit. We got our first papaya from our papaya tree during this month, and this is the solo variety of papaya, one of the most popular varieties that you can grow in your home garden just because of its very sweet taste, and it also tastes very nice compared to other papayas. You can see there are many more papayas on the way, but we were very happy with the papaya harvest that we got. Here are some more papayas that will mature very soon. Peppers. We were growing a lot of pepper varieties. This is the Santa Fe Grande pepper. And we also had our Santaka chili peppers growing in a container. The Santaka chili peppers are not as hot as some of the other chili varieties that we have, like the Thai chili or the bird's eye chili. But it's still a very nice chili variety to grow because of its taste. You can look how beautiful they look. They are upright in their growth habit, just like the bird's eye chili peppers. And you can either harvest the chilies individually, or as I'm doing here, you can just trim off the tops, because the chili plant actually stops growing once it produces all these chilies. We had plants growing in our raised bed as well. And you can see how beautiful these chilies are. Again, we are harvesting just the chilies, or you can harvest the entire stem, chop off the entire stem, and that will encourage the plant to send out more shoots, which will in turn produce more peppers or more chilies. And you can look at our harvest here, beautiful looking Santaka chili peppers. Ridge gourd, also called Chinese okra, is a very prolific plant, especially during the summer months, and we harvested a lot of ridge gourds, as you can see here. We started off the month with just a few. You can see here, this is when you should be harvesting your ridge gourds, when they're tender. And the plant itself was huge and produced a lot of ridge gourds. Now this is our first harvest for the month. However, there are a lot of ridge gourds growing on the plant, and we're going to be harvesting a few more. And this year I was very happy with the way our ridge gourds grew. We got a lot of ridge gourds. You can see here beautiful looking ridge gourds that we harvested from this plant. And we started off with a few each week, and the plant just kept on giving. There were more and more ridge gourds produced by the plant as the month went by. And you can see how nice and tender these ridge gourds are. Now, ridge gourds don't really require a lot of care. I haven't seen any insects or diseases attack this plant, at least so far. And the rich gourds that it produced are almost perfect. You can look at our beautiful harvest here, and we are not done yet because this plant is so prolific that it has now grown over the top of the trellis and is now yielding rich gourds even there and along the sides. So throughout the month of August, we harvested a lot of rich gourds, and rich gourds can be prepared in a lot of different ways. I would highly recommend checking out some recipes before you start growing rich gourds. But this is such a prolific plant that we kept getting rich gourds almost every week from this plant, and that too a lot. You can look at our next harvest here, beautiful looking rich gourds, and there are still more to come. Strawberries. We were growing strawberries in our green-stalk planter, our green-stalk leaf planter, and as I've mentioned in my previous episodes, the green-stalk leaf planter is probably one of the best ways to grow strawberries, just because the strawberries don't touch the ground. You get really nice and clean fruits. You don't have to worry about insects or slugs or snails eating your strawberries. Something that was always a problem when I was growing strawberries in containers or raised beds or on the ground. With the green-stalk leaf planter, since it's an elevated planter, it makes growing strawberries very easy. Now, the other advantage of growing strawberries in the green-stalk planter is that once these strawberries have these runners, you can simply plant them in the pockets that are below that plant, and that makes the plant even stronger. You can see all these runners, which are basically new strawberry plants, and you can easily plant them in more pockets to get even more strawberries as the season goes on. Look at our harvest here, beautiful looking and delicious strawberries. Taro root. Our taro root plant was growing in a container to start with. These are excellent quality taro roots that you can see. Very much unlike the ones you get in the grocery store. The ones you get in the grocery store are extremely large. They're not as flavorful, but the ones that you grow at home are much smaller since we're growing them organically. The soil has a lot of rich organic matter. You can look at all the worm castings that we added to this potting mix, and that makes a huge difference in the quality and taste of what you're harvesting. Now, the taro root plant is also a subtropical plant. It grows very well in Southern California, extremely easy to grow, and the best part is that it's also an ornamental plant. It produces beautiful leaves that will really stand out in your garden, give your garden a very tropical look, tropical feel. And while containers are one way to grow taro root, you can also grow them in the ground, you can grow them in raised beds, and they will produce abundantly. Now, some of the bigger plants will produce more taro roots. As you can see here, this is a bigger plant. It did produce more. Taro also has a very long growing season. It can take up to 6 to 8 months before you can harvest your taro roots. And that's perfectly fine because you can start taro almost any time during the year in Southern California. Spring and fall are the best times, but you can start taro root almost any time during the year. Taro does need a lot of water. You can make sure that you have some kind of an irrigation system for your taro, which will give you very nice looking plants. We also had taro growing in the ground. Now, the ones growing in the ground yield a lot more taro than the ones growing in the container. And that's just the nature of how taro grows. You can also see that we have a lot of moisture in the soil here. You can make sure that you keep your taro plant irrigated very well, and that will give you a lot of taro roots. Now, taro root is very starchy, it's very delicious. It has a lot of nutrient value. And it's a good alternative to potatoes. It has a nutty flavor. It's a nuttier version of potatoes. I find it very delicious. It's one of my favorite vegetables. And you can just plant all the taro plants back, either in the soil or in the container. Now, I'm choosing a different container because I wanted the taro plant to get more nutrients from the newer container. However, you can plant taro almost anywhere. Make sure that you mulch your taro plants since they love a lot of water, a lot of moisture. You can mulch them to save them in the summer season. And you can look at our taro harvest here. Beautiful looking taro root. Tomatoes. Last but not the least, we had tomatoes growing in our raised bed. These are the single stem tomatoes that we have seen in the past few episodes. And they've all grown very well, as you can see. I've also started a new batch of tomatoes that I'll shortly show you. However, these plants are still producing, so I'm still harvesting tomatoes from these single stem tomato plants. I've not kept up much with the pruning, but the plant still is yielding a lot of tomatoes. Now you see a little bit of sun scald here. This is common in hotter areas like Southern California. And to prevent that, you can harvest your tomatoes a little early. However, I like to wait for my tomatoes to become fully ripe on the vine. These are the Roma tomatoes on the raised bed. The bush Roma variety is another excellent tomato variety for all home gardeners. It yields very delicious tomatoes in a determinate plant. And we also had these Indian heirloom tomatoes that were growing in a container. Multiple containers actually. And these are also excellent quality tomatoes. And some more heirloom Indian tomatoes from the other container. All in all, August was also an excellent month for growing tomatoes. And we have multiple tomato varieties and they're all growing very nice and giving us a very good harvest. You can look at our harvest here, beautiful looking tomatoes. And this is the new tomato patch that we just planted in July. You can see the tomato plants have already grown. These are volunteer plants from the compost, but beautiful looking tomatoes as you see. And now let's begin with the tour of the garden, starting with the raised beds. In our first raised bed, we have a lot of tomatoes, sweet potatoes. They're all growing very well. You can see some pumpkin plants. These grew from the compost that we added here. Tomatoes, as you can see here. And our emerald okras. We had a lot of emerald okras growing here. They're all growing really well. And then on the other side where we had our beans growing, you can see that we have trimmed down our beans quite a lot. And this is so that the beans can regrow now into bigger plants and reoccupy the trellis. On the next raised bed, we have our eggplants. Lots of eggplants as you can see here. This is the purple Indian eggplant. And we also have the small Indian eggplant that's growing here. So all in all, just a bed full of eggplants of different varieties, all growing very well. On the next raised bed, we have more eggplants. This is the Aswad eggplant, which produces really large eggplants. These are almost ready for harvest. Followed by our beets. Now the beets didn't really recover. It's been too hot. And the okras are doing well. You can see here multiple okra varieties. You saw the burgundy okra as well. And this is our ridge gourd plant. Now just look at how big these plants have gotten. There are about 5 plants here. And it's almost impossible for me to enter from here, just too dense here. But all in all, this plant has grown quite huge. And there are a lot of ridge gourds growing. This has grown all over the place over the trellis and is still growing strong. We now have our new tomato patch. We planted these tomatoes in July, and these were actually volunteer plants from the compost. And they're really good quality tomatoes, very strong plants, and they're producing quite a lot of tomatoes. We have our sour cucumbers or the dosakkai. We have a few to harvest before we remove the plants. You can see some ridge gourds here growing on this huge plant. And on the last raised bed, we just sowed some seeds, as well as planted a few plants like ginger and taro on the left side. And you can see where I've put the labels here. These are all seeds of radish, carrots, and beets. We have a couple of pepper plants that are still growing. And on the side, we have this ivy gourd plant that's quite big and has yielded a lot of ivy gourds. And that completes the tour of our raised bed garden. Let's now move on to the containers. On the first side of containers, we have our 4-in-1 apple tree, which is now producing more leaves. We have our firecracker plant that we just transplanted and is growing well. We sowed some radish seeds here. We also have our overwintered eggplant. This is the black moon eggplant. And we have our heirloom Indian tomatoes, still growing well. And then we have our mint plant. Now this mint plant really needs a trim. We need to trim this plant so that it grows new leaves. We have our Santaka chili plant. You just saw us harvesting a lot of chilies. We have our holy basil that's grown quite big. We have our turmeric plant. And finally our galangal plant that's now grown quite well. And in the large container we have our fig tree, the mission fig that's growing well. And I wanted to give you a sneak peek on our mango tree that's on the corner. You can see that it has one mango. Yes, a very nice looking mango, but just one. And this is our dwarf mango tree, the little gem. Moving on to the other side of the containers, we have some pepper plants that are not doing that well. They're doing okay. We have more Nombo giant okras that we just planted. And more Nombo giant okras, as you can see here. We also just sowed some bean seeds here, pole beans, so that they can grow in the warmer months. We have our Egyptian onions that have grown quite well and have produced some onions. As you can see here, these are the onions it produces. Very interesting plant. And we have our tomato plant. This is a beefsteak style tomato. We have our snake gourd plant that is now showing new signs of growth. You can see some snake gourds here, looking pretty good. We then have our taro plant that's grown quite big already, followed by our single stem tomato plant. This is the ace tomato that's now showing signs of growth as well, followed by more okra plants. This is the emerald okra, growing quite well. We have our ivy gourd plant that's growing on this trellis. You saw so many ivy gourds that we harvested from this plant. Our mint plant again in the corner is not doing that well. It needs a trim. We have our turmeric plant that's grown quite large now, looking pretty good. And just behind that you can see our papaya trees. Beautiful looking trees. And then we have our tomato plant. This is the heirloom Indian tomato plant, grown as a single stem. Needs a little bit of pruning. We have more Nombo giant okra plants, looking quite good, flowering and producing okras. These are bush beans that we sowed last month and they have now come up very well. Followed by our hyacinth bean plants that are now looking really good. We grew these plants for seeds. And we have our carrots that have now taken off quite well. Followed by our dwarf kale plants. The first time we are growing dwarf kale. And this is the taro that we transplanted after we harvested our taro roots. Followed by two more aswadik plants that are looking good here. On the other side, we have our bottle gourd plant that is now producing more bottle gourds and has now grown the entire length of the trellis and is coming down. We have our early long eggplant that's growing quite well, followed by our ivy gourd plant that has grown quite well in this trellis. And we sowed some more pole bean seeds here, followed by our longevity spinach plant. In our greenstock classic planter, we are growing a lot of onions. You saw us growing onions in this greenstock planter last season as well, and we got a really big harvest. The only difference is this time we are growing the onion plants from seeds. So these onions are looking quite good. And you can see how nicely these onions are growing. You can grow onions in this greenstock planter if you want to save some space. It's a very good solution to growing a lot of plants in a small vertical space. In our greenstock leaf planter, We have a lot of strawberries growing. You can see how well these strawberry plants are growing. And since it's a vertical method of growing strawberries, you can see that the strawberries are very clean. They do not touch the dirt. So when you harvest the strawberries, they are clean, they are very nice. They don't have any insect damage from slugs or snails. And overall, the green stalk leaf planter is one of the best ways of growing strawberries in your home garden. We use it for growing herbs, but strawberries are also a wonderful crop that you can grow in your green stalk leaf planter. And as the runners for these strawberry plants come over, you can just plant them in these pockets of the green stalk planter and get even more plants. So all in all, it's a great solution for growing strawberries. And now let's look at some things to do in the garden, beginning with pest control. Pest control means controlling the bad guys or the bad insects in your garden. And our weapon of choice is neem oil. This is neem oil extract that you can purchase at any garden store. I'll also provide a link in the comment section below where you can buy this on Amazon. Always look at the first pinned comment to buy any product that I've discussed in the video. And this is a small sprayer, so I'm adding 3 capfuls here. If you're using a larger sprayer, you can add a little bit more and read the instructions on the product to see how much you need to mix. And after mixing it with water, we're going to spray the corn silks. Now this is a very important step you need to do when growing corn. If you don't do this, the corn worm will just eat up your corn when it's being ready. And I've had this damage in the past, and ever since I've been spraying my corn silks and I've always been getting a decent harvest. Now make sure that you watch your tomato plants carefully. If you have tomato plants that look like this, you probably have this little buddy on your tomato plant that's chewing away the leaves. This is the tomato hornworm, and just remove this pest as soon as you see it. And while it looks really beautiful, look how gorgeous it looks, just amazing. This pest though will completely devastate your tomato plant in a matter of hours. And this is one more reason why you should be monitoring your plants and making sure that there are no insects or pests on your plant. And one more important activity that you need to do for your tomato plants is pruning. Now I'll admit it, I hate pruning. It's just a lot of work. I am always behind when it comes to pruning, but it's extremely important to prune your tomato plants. Remove all the brown and dead leaves, any branches like this that are growing on the side. They add no value to your tomato growing and will introduce a lot of diseases which will ultimately destroy your tomato plant. So any yellow leaves, any brown leaves, feel free to just remove them. And I usually don't even compost it. I just throw it in the trash and remove any suckers that are growing. The suckers will also take up energy from your plant and not cause your plants to grow very well. And for our next section, we will look at how to build a trellis between raised beds. And for this, you need a wire remesh. This is a 42 inches by 84 inches wire remesh sheet. And this is usually found in the hardware section of your home improvement store. And the first thing we'll do is paint it. Now, painting this is a real pain. It takes a lot of time. And if you're using a brush like me, it will probably take you a good 30 minutes to paint each of these meshes. But once done, what you need to do is put one mesh on each side of your bed. And this height is 42 inches, the width is 84 inches. So you need 2 of those. Now once you put the mesh, I'm using a 5-foot fence post to secure this mesh. And it's extremely easy to secure it. There are already holes in the fence. All you need to do is use some wire ties, and the wire ties will just lock in place. They will hold the fence in place. And once you do that, your trellis is pretty much done if you just want one side. Like I was using this as an independent trellis just on one side of the bed. But if you want the trellis across your raised beds, then you have to add in one more panel on the other side. So as you can see, I'm just finishing up the panel on one side by using these wire ties. And then I'm doing the same thing on the other side of the raised bed. So I'll be creating exactly the same base trellis. And you can see you just have to really position your fence posts and then Keep your trellis right next to the fence post where you can use the wire ties to secure them. And you may have to move the fence a little bit here and there depending on where your mesh actually sits. And after that, it's easy. All you do is use wire ties to secure the fence. So you now have one horizontal fence, which is 42 inches in height, 84 inches in length. And you're now securing them with the wire ties. And once you have these two ready, you can see them side by side here. You can use them as independent trellises. But what we have done is to add a trellis between the raised beds. We added another panel on top of it and we are securing it now. And it overlaps about two sections. You can see two of the squares overlap, so that gives us enough room to tie these two trellises together. And all we really did was to just hold the trellis and then tie it. You don't even need to bend the trellis which goes on top. It just takes a natural curve shape. And you need to secure the trellis along with the one you put in the bottom very securely. And we are doing this using 8-inch wire ties. I think the 8-inch wire ties are the perfect size for securing heavy material like this. And once the wire ties are there in place, I think this trellis looks very sturdy and very secure. And you're going to be using a lot of wire ties, so I suggest that you buy a 100 pack. It's just a lot cheaper. And right in between, we have added another fence post, a 5-foot fence post. And the reason for adding that in the center is because the trellis on the top are actually two sections, two more panels. So by adding the third fence in between, you add more stability, you add more structure to your trellis. And this trellis is so sturdy that it can be used to grow pretty much any type of climbing plant. And you can see the wire ties, they help secure the trellis very well. And it also lets the trellis maintain its natural arc very easily. And this is how the trellis looks like after it's done. As you can see, we've added two trellis in the center. And the long side is between the two trellises and it bends easily. And the wire ties that have been holding this in place can now be cut off. The edges can be cut off. You don't have to cut off the entire wire tie, but just the tails that are left. And a lot of people just leave the tails on and that makes it look very ugly. I highly recommend that you cut off the tails because the wire ties will still hold everything in place. And these are quite long wire ties. So while you want the rigidity of the 8-inch wire tie, you don't want the long tails. So just cut them off one by one and your trellis will start looking very beautiful. And the final step is to just spray paint the wire ties. I think the wire ties are the only ones that stand out and don't look that beautiful. So once you spray paint them, I think they blend in very nicely to the actual trellis. And I'm using the same color spray paint that I used to paint the trellis. And even to paint the trellis itself, you can use a spray paint. It looks beautiful. And this is how our final trellis looks like. I'm walking under it and this is about 6 feet high, the trellis. So it's not too high, which is good. And it also is sturdy enough to hold almost any kind of vegetable like gourds, pumpkins, melons, cucumbers, almost anything that needs support. And now for the recipe section of our video. And today we have ivy gourd with peanuts for you. So as you saw, we harvested a lot of ivy gourds from our ivy gourd plant and we had to put it to good use. So the first step is to chop up the ivy gourds. And once you've chopped it up, just wash it well. You can wash it before you chop it as well. And this is how it looks like. The ivy gourds chopped up. They almost look like mini cucumbers. We're now going to chop up some chilies, some hot peppers, some garlic. The garlic adds a lot of flavor to what we are preparing. And some cilantro, which adds a lot of aroma and a little bit of spice to the ivy gourd with peanuts. And we need half a lemon. Take some peanuts in a pan and just roast it. We've used about 1 cup of peanuts. And once they're roasted, you can add them to any kind of blender and just slightly crush them. You don't want to grind them to a powder, but just crush them a little bit, keep it coarse so that it looks something like this. And then in a pan you can take some oil, just a little bit of oil, and then add mustard seeds, and then add in the chopped up garlic and chilies, and finally add in the chopped ivy gourd and then mix it well. And we are adding a couple of spoons of turmeric powder into this. And remember that turmeric is very good for your health. We use it almost every day. We're adding just a dash of chili powder. You don't have to do it, but just a dash of chili powder adds a lot of good flavor to this dish. And you start cooking it. Just keep it covered for about 5 minutes. And open it up and check how the ivy gourds have cooked. And as you can see, we need to keep stirring it. Keep stirring it in this open pan for quite some time. Takes about 5 to 7 minutes for the ivy gourds to cook completely. And it may take longer depending on your heat settings. But usually about 7 minutes or so is good enough to cook all these ivy gourds. And you need to keep stirring in between just to make sure that the ivy gourds are not sticking to each other and they're cooking evenly. And once they are slightly brown, as you can see here, this is the time to now move on to the next step, which is to add the crushed peanuts and mix it well. And once you add the crushed peanuts, it'll still take a while for it to blend into the ivy gourd. The ivy gourd absorbs all the flavors of the peanuts and it takes some time. And finally, we garnish it with some cilantro. You can see it's already looking very beautiful. And once you mix in the cilantro uses a little bit of heat to spread its flavor within the dish. So just stir it up a little bit. And we are done preparing our dish. Now the only thing that we left out is the lemon. So just squeeze some lemon on top just to give it a nice flavor. And this is very delicious ivy gourd with peanuts that you can eat with tortillas, with rice, and it tastes absolutely amazing. So there we have it, folks. That was our episode of the July 2022 episode of California Gardening. Hit that like button if you like this video. If you are not already a subscriber, hit that subscribe button for all future updates. We'll see you again soon. Happy gardening.